Greetings and welcome to the Talk with History podcast. I am your host, Scott, here with my wife and historian, Jen.
Hi.
On this podcast, we talk about history's continuing impact on us and our personal journey through YouTube as we continue to explore, record, and share our history walks with you. This is our 5-star question of the week portion. But seeing as how it is still just you and I with 5-star reviews on our own podcast here.
2 for 2.
I'm just going to put out a call. Folks will start hearing this once the 5th episode comes out. So if you guys want to get a question answered on this portion of the podcast in the future, please leave us a review in iTunes, and I will do my best to get your question answered on a future podcast episode. Today, we have a topic that everybody's heard about.
This is a biggie.
And if you grew up in the United States, you learned about the assassination of President Abraham Lincoln. On April 14th, 1865, John Wilkes Booth shot the 16th president in Ford's Theater, cementing himself in American history as the notorious criminal that he was. But did you know that Abraham Lincoln was supposed to watch a different play at a different theater that night? Did John Wilkes Booth know that, or was he just lucky? Jen?
I think that's what made this video so interesting is I kind of found out that little tidbit of information probably about a week before we went to D.C., and I thought, oh, this would be a really great way to open Walk with History, and that's how we open it. We open at the Lincoln Memorial on the Mall. We open with that question that he actually had tickets to the National Theater to see Aladdin that night. And John Wilkes Booth knew he was going to the National Theater, and he had bought tickets to the box right beside him, knowing that that's where he was going to be that night. But as we all know, he went to Ford's Theater. So my question was, would Booth have known? Would things have been different if Booth hadn't found out that he was going to Ford's Theater? And if you watch Walk with History, I kind of explain about how he finds out. He actually goes to Ford's Theater at noon the day of the 14th to get his mail, and the theater owner says to him, oh, the Lincolns have RSVP'd for tonight's play, Our American Cousin, because it was a comedy, and Mrs. Lincoln wanted her husband to laugh. And
because this was only a week after...
Yeah, 1 week after the end of the Civil War.
At the end of the Civil War. And one of the things that you did a good job in the video of was emphasizing how famous John Wilkes Booth was, and comparing him to famous actors of today.
He'd be like a Brad Pitt or Denzel Washington. Yeah. Like A-list. Tom Cruise, A-list. Like to that extreme of an A-list actor where you would see them walk in and you wouldn't even question their access because they're just that high up on the echelon, right? We have friends who work in the military and they've met high echelon actors because they feel like they have that kind of closeness to military members. And so that's who Booth was. He was
and as a general, right, as a non-history geek myself, I just didn't know that, right? I thought he was like planning and scheming and like had to sneak in and all this stuff. And he really, because of his access, he just kind of walked in because he's John Wilkes Booth. Like he had performed there like the night before, or a couple nights before, and he performed at Ford's Theater all the time. So all of the staff there, they see him come in, like, oh yeah, hey, Mr. Booth, come on in, and you, like you said, he was collecting his mail there.
They think nothing of it. They think he's just going to say hi to the president. When he goes into his box at Ford's Theater, they're just thinking he's going to say hi, check in. And he has that access. He's so famous. What's interesting about this video is it's like 12 locations. So it's one of our, like, when it comes to locations, the most saturated. So if you watch this video, we're going to all these different places and trying to show you how that night the conspiracy was to kill not just the president, but the Vice President Johnson and Secretary of State. And I say his name wrong in the video. It's Seward, but I say it's Seward the whole time. I'm a name butcher, just putting that out there. And so people have corrected me. It's spelled like Seward,
Right.
but it's pronounced Seward. So, so we go to all those locations because this was a conspiracy to cripple the Union. They wanted to take out all the top leadership at one time so that the South had its opportunity to rise again. But it started out as a kidnap plot.
Right. And it started out at what's the house? Mary
Surratt. So John Surratt, her son, was a spy for the Confederacy, and he basically helps start this whole kidnap plot. And the kidnap plot was to kidnap Lincoln, take him to Richmond, trade him for all these Confederate prisoners of war. That was the whole plot before the end of the war. Now that the war is over, it switches quickly, as you can see, to a assassination plot. And Lincoln, we showed this in the video, will give a very famous speech right after the surrender. And Booth is at that speech. Now, and then he makes a comment like that'll be the last speech he ever says. And so this is another thing that happened to us is you had edited that video and you had used a snippet of that speech from the movie Lincoln with Daniel Day-Lewis.
Right.
And then you had used the picture from something else and you said, this is the picture from that speech. Well, it wasn't. That speech was his inauguration speech and the picture was something else. So people kind of caught us on that. So we were just trying to show proximity, how he had that access to the president.
Yeah. And again, it's not like John Wilkes Booth had to sneak into wherever the president was giving speeches. He was John Wilkes Booth. He's an A-list actor. And honestly, back then, people could just go attend the president's speech. They didn't have to have an invitation.
Yeah. But it was that speech that just kind of like ignites the fire. He was really like a strong Southern sympathizer. So that speech ignites his fire that he said that's the last speech the president will ever give. Yeah. Like he's very on fire about that. So that's when he meets with Powell and Assarot, and he's like, "We're killing everyone tonight. We're going to kill them."
Yeah. Now, these were the other co-conspirators, and again, to paint the picture for people who haven't seen the video, we set the scene with all the players.
We do. Mm-hmm.
Mary Surratt and the co-conspirators of John Wilkes Booth. Right. Those are some of the most famous folks.
Yeah. So John Wilkes Booth is going after Lincoln. Powell is going after Seward, and Assarot is going after Johnson. Johnson's the vice president. Seward's Secretary of State. Those are who they put in place to do the actual act. And then you have supporters, right? So there's like John Surratt, Mary Surratt, Harold, who we talk about a couple times. Harold is with Booth when he's killed.
Yeah. And then one of the things that I found interesting was kind of how coordinated this group was. Like you said, all on the same night, they were going to try to... They changed from kidnapping to assassination, but they were going to try to assassinate 3 different people.
Yeah.
All at the same time.
All at the same time.
And all in very close proximity.
Yeah. So they try to do it around 10 p.m. because they don't want one to be done and then it sets off this, what's going on and everyone gets high security around them. They want everything to kind of happen at the same time. Right. And I think you have... Unfortunately, Booth is the only one who's successful, right? So we do a really great job in the video if you watch it. Powell is, he's ready to fight. He gets into Seward's house.
And Seward's house was actually
right by the White House.
Right next to the White House. So we went, and that was another cool thing of what we get to do with our videos is we were there standing in front of the White House, as close as you can get right now. It's pretty well fenced off. So we were standing next to some kind of protester spot or something like that. But I didn't realize how close, he was the Secretary of State.
Yeah.
How close it was to the White House.
Yeah,
he was right there. And then it was 2 or 3 blocks away was the hotel for
the Kirkwood House.
The Kirkwood House.
And that's where Johnson was staying. But Powell, he gets in that house. He
stabs him.
He injures 8 people. He kills no one. He injures 4 of Seward's children. And then like the nurse and the security guard and Seward. He stabs him in the cheek and he stabs him in the neck. And so much so that there's blood everywhere. So you would think that he did kill him. But it was with such force that he grabs him. And he's an older gentleman. Plus, he just was in a carriage accident. So he's kind of convalescing in his bed. And he grabs him with such force, probably has a lot of adrenaline, that he stabs him twice in the face, kind of slips off, and then he actually ends up like pushing him off the bed. And that's what saves his life because he gets behind the bed.
Yeah.
And then by that time, his kids, he has sons who grab him and pull him out. And they basically fight him out the house. Yeah. And then people aren't really sure where Powell goes from there because he'll show up at Mary Surratt's house a couple of days later. He shows up exactly as the investigators are there to question Mary Surratt.
I didn't
he
know
walks
that.
in too. And it's like, okay.
I didn't remember that.
So they arrest both of them.
Oh, wow. This is one of my favorite videos to edit because I just kind of stumbled across. I would try to clip in funny movie scenes to kind of lighten the mood of some of these things, or something that's kind of in reference to whatever we're talking about.
Yes.
And Astaroth, he basically goes and he's supposed to try to attack the vice president.
Vice President Johnson, who's at the Kirkwood house, which is, it's like a first class boarding house.
Right.
A very nice boarding house.
And he ends up sitting in the hotel bar and gets just smashed.
and he gets
smashed. And if anybody listening has ever seen Old School.
Yeah.
So the Will Ferrell movie that made him famous as Frank the Tank. So I clip in a scene of Will Ferrell saying, no, I can't drink at some college party, right? Because he's part of the fraternity, and then all of a sudden, then he starts drinking more and more, and then he's streaking down the street, and by himself, and so I kind of cut that in with what Astaroth did, because essentially that's what happened with Astaroth.
That's what happened with Astaroth. He just kept asking questions. Where's the vice president? And is he in his room? Is he going to be there all night? And so people were wondering, why does he keep asking these questions about the vice president? So he notices that he's raising suspicion. And so he wanders out of the hotel, and by that time he's very intoxicated, and he wanders around and he drops a big knife in a gutter. A lady sees him do it. She tells the police what she saw. And so then he is arrested. He never even attacks the vice president, but he will be executed because he is part of the conspiracy. And Kirkwood House, which is not there anymore, but we stand at the address. Yeah. That is where Johnson will be inaugurated. So I make the mistake on the video saying that he's inaugurated at the Peterson House. That's where Lincoln passes away. It's the boarding house across the street from Ford's Theater. Johnson will go there after Lincoln is shot, and he will visit him, but he's told to leave. And he says that he basically paces his suite at the Kirkwood House the rest of the night. Okay. And it's that next morning that he's told, because Lincoln will pass away at 7:22 a.m., that he's told that Lincoln has passed. And so he thinks it's poor taste to be inaugurated anywhere else than his location. Sure. So the justice, the Supreme Court justice comes to the Kirkwood House and swears him in on April 15th, 1865 at the Kirkwood House. Yeah.
And it was actually really cool because we did this. We were out there visiting in D.C. Mm-hmm. We were hanging out with family for a few days. Yep. And we had done a bunch of, we were doing history stuff. Yeah. There's history everywhere there. Yeah. We had done the mall. We had been to Arlington partly already, and we had done a couple other things. Mount Vernon. Mm-hmm. And so we got lucky, right? Your mom was watching the kids, and it took us all of like 3-ish hours to film this.
We have to plan it out.
We planned it out, and we were moving fast. We were moving fast, but you could walk it relatively easily in an afternoon or a morning.
You could, and this was a really great video for our walk with history, just what we wanted to do with like a map.
Right.
Like have access to a map that coincided with our episode, so you could walk the places that we're walking, because we go to all the locations. We'll go to Baptist Alley, which is really cool. That's the alleyway behind Ford's Theater. And it looks the same. So that's what's really cool about it. You can imagine John Wilkes Booth coming out that stage door, getting on the horse and riding down the alley. And I'll just kind of
toot my own horn here. I think I do a good job in the video of just kind of setting the scene and getting some sound effects, and kind of we're standing right there, literally in the alley, looking at the doors where John Wilkes Booth ran out, jumped on a horse, and hauled butt out of town. Yeah. And so I do a decent job of kind of showing that
Mm-hmm.
and getting those sound effects, and you really feel like, oh man, must have been what it was like.
Yeah.
That was real. That was, to me, one of the neatest things, because not a lot of people are going to go find Baptist Alley.
Mm-hmm.
But everybody's going to go over to Ford's Theater and do stuff like that.
You'll
You
see
can
the
kind of
Peterson
stand
House.
outside.
Yes, you'll do
But
both of those. But to walk around the back,
that was really neat.
and to see the escape route of Booth was really neat. And we went to Mary Surratt's house.
Yep.
But I think what was really cool, what we did in this video, is we actually go to Fort McNair.
Right. Where the conspirators were hung.
Where the conspirators were hung. And not a lot of people, you have to have base access to go there.
That's right.
You're not allowed to just go there and see it. I mean, we had to show our IDs to even get on there.
Yeah.
And we had been to Fort McNair before for a wedding.
Yep.
And you could see that location from the officers club where the wedding was. But where we stood where the conspirators were hung.
Yeah.
And, they hung for 30 minutes. And they made and this is Mary Surratt, right? She's the first woman executed by the American U.S. government officially.
And I was surprised when I was making the video that, I mean, there's pictures.
Mm-hmm.
There's pictures of that hanging. Hey, you can see, if you Google it, you can look up pictures of those Lincoln assassination conspirators being hung.
Yeah, and they really hung her to try to get John, her son, because he had fled. He claims that he did not know about the assassination, which it could be plausible because, right, we said Booth made this a quick judgment.
Right.
We're not going to do the kidnapping. We're going to make this. So he claimed that he was just a part of the kidnapping plot, changed the assassination plot. He did not know that. He heard about it in New York. He flees to Canada. He's able to make it across the ocean to Liverpool. He's able to make it to Italy. And then as he's trying to go from Italy to Egypt, he gets caught.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that.
And then he's brought back to America. And he's not brought back to America until, I think it's 1867.
So we actually had people like hunting him down over there in Egypt.
Yeah, I mean, Lincoln was a well-loved president.
Yeah.
And so then he goes months after his mom's been killed, and it's a 2-month trial, and then it's just declared a mistrial. And then statute of limitations run out. He lives out his life.
Yeah.
He's the only conspirator to really, I mean, you have Mudd and you have other conspirators who are sent to prison.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about Dr. Mudd.
So Dr. Mudd is sent to prison. And Dr. Mudd, as much as people say he tries to claim that he has no part of this, he's actually the one who introduces Booth and Surratt. He actually did that in December of 1863.
Yeah, I didn't realize that.
Or 1864.
And they talk about that in the movie National Treasure.
So he sets Booth's leg
Yeah.
after it's broken. And then again, he tries to claim he doesn't know who he is. He did it under duress. But it comes out that he actually introduced Booth and Surratt for the first time. He actually keeps Booth's boot, I think, after he sets his leg, because I think he thinks it's going to be worth some money or something. Yeah. So he's sent to prison. And it's actually President Johnson who will release him from prison 2 years later. So there's a very interesting story about Powell and all of this. So like I said, after everyone's hung for 30 minutes, they cut them down. They put them in wooden boxes. They put a little glass vial with each of them with their names and paper, and they bury them against the east wall of the prison. So right there at Fort McNair.
Yeah.
And then 2 years later, Johnson has allowed them to dig up the bodies and given back to their families to do with what they want. And Mudd is released from prison, and other conspirators are released from prison. And this is, I think, another reason why John Surratt doesn't go to jail, has the mistrial. Yep. Because Johnson wants to heal the nation, right? So in 1991, Powell's skull is found at the Smithsonian Museum of Native Americans with a group of skulls. And for some reason, they get Powell's skull with this group of skulls in 1991. And they don't even know how they have his skull. Why do they have his skull? All they can go back to is in 1867, they allowed the bodies to be dug up and go back to their families. So what they found is that Powell's family didn't claim his body in 1867. So he was buried in some cemetery in D.C., like a pauper's cemetery. And this is an interesting story because sometimes when you look up Powell, it'll say Powell Payne.
Yeah.
You remember that? Like the last names are kind of interchangeable. So in 1885, this Army Medical Museum gets this skull with a P stenciled on it. And it says Paine, and it says a criminal executed by hanging. And they're able to put it back into place that this is actually Powell. This is Powell's skull. We have his skull. And so they keep it for a while, and then they give it to the Smithsonian in 1898. And for some reason, it gets put in with the Native American collection. And so then in 1991, when it gets brought over to the Smithsonian in their collection, they're like, okay, so what do we do with this skull? It's definitely not Native American, and we're not going to keep it. So they find this 70-year-old niece of Lewis Powell, and they take 2 years to verify that she's actually his niece. And they ask her, what do you want to do with the skull? It's your family's skull. And she decides to have it buried with his mother. Yeah. So I think it's somewhere in the South in Georgia that his skull gets buried.
History is such like the weirdest thing. Like, you know what that reminds me of is, what was the movie with Matthew McConaughey? Savannah.
Yeah.
Right? And so in part of that movie, he's hunting down these gold medallions.
Yes,
right?
Sahara.
Mm-hmm. Sahara. And his buddy starts saying, he's like, well, my dad collects coins. Yeah. He's like, okay, well, what's your point? He's like, well, my dad collects coins from all over the world. And coins, they just end up in someone's pocket, and they travel here and they travel there, and all of a sudden they end up somewhere else. Mm-hmm. Right? It's the same thing when you have something of such historical impact and characters like that.
Yeah.
Here's this guy's skull traveling from place to place for decades.
And even the Smithsonian can't. So I read a little, like they try to think where his body is. Why isn't the skull with the body? They have some theories, but they don't know for sure exactly where the body is. They think it was somebody in the pauper gravesite area who knew who he was and got kind of excited and dug up his skull. That's what they think it was.
Now, if I remember right, one of the things you pointed out in this video was that after this assassination, that's kind of when the Secret Service really became more of a thing. Was that after this one?
So it's a little bit after this one, but I think it gets really more amped up after Garfield's assassination.
Okay.
So Lincoln is the first assassination. And then Garfield will be the second assassination.
Okay, and then all of a sudden the government's like, okay, we got to start protecting our president.
So it's really after Garfield. I mean, and what's really funny about all this is poor Robert Todd Lincoln.
That's right.
Right? So we talk about this. Like, Robert Todd Lincoln was at the surrender.
Abraham's son.
Abraham's son, his oldest son, his only surviving son. He has only one son that will survive to adulthood and live out his life. It's his oldest son. And he is at the surrender at the Appomattox Courthouse. He is with Grant when Lee surrenders. So he makes it back to D.C. He's tired. His parents ask him if he wants to go with them to Ford's Theater. He says, no, I'm tired. His younger brother takes the tickets to the other show.
To
Aladdin. Tad. He goes to Aladdin. Robert stays home and rests. Then Lincoln's assassinated. He makes sure Tad gets home. He makes sure Tad is taken care of, guarded, and he goes to the Peterson house. Yep. And he sits with his father until he passes. Then when Garfield is president, he's made Secretary of War. Garfield has a great respect for Lincoln. Garfield was a Union general in the Civil War. He makes Robert Todd Lincoln his Secretary of War. And he is with him in the train station when he is shot by Charles Godot. Robert Todd Lincoln is there. And what's neat about it, though, is this is when the government has paid for Arlington and they get the deed. And it's actually because he's Secretary of War, it's Robert Todd Lincoln who will actually accept the deed of Arlington. Yeah. And then when McKinley is assassinated in 1901, Robert Todd Lincoln is also there. He's standing outside the front door. And so that's when the Secret Service really gets ramped up after that assassination. That's the third assassination. And he also bows out of public life after that because he gets very, as you can imagine, he's been with the three presidents that have been assassinated. Yeah,
he's famous by position and by association.
Yeah, so he feels somewhat, and I wouldn't say responsible, but he just feels like he's not a good luck charm. So he's
like, I'm tired of being around persons when they're shot.
So he'll respectfully decline any invitation.
Yeah.
But he is there when the Lincoln Memorial is dedicated. He'll be there with Taft.
Oh, cool.
Taft will be the president to dedicate the Lincoln Memorial, and he'll be there for that.
I didn't know that.
So he probably was swallowing real hard that day, looking around and watching everybody.
Yeah, I mean, it really was that. I think more than some of our other videos, you really feel like I am walking where they walked.
Yeah.
For as kitschy as it is, we felt like we were walking with history.
It was really cool. And so that we film our opening from the Lincoln Memorial, right? And so it glows at night, right? Because they keep all the lights on the Lincoln Memorial really bright, and then they darken everything else around it. So you can really see it from everywhere on the mall. It's really like a statement. And we filmed our opening there because it's not as crowded at night too, and I could kind of stand by the statue and not have a lot of people. But when we were sitting out on the steps, it is kind of engraved in the granite where Martin Luther King had stood for his I Have a Dream speech. Yep. And during the day, you can see it just fine. And tons of people will take pictures.
It's a little metal plaque that's on the ground.
No, it's just engraved into the marble.
Oh, that's right.
It's nothing there. So people can't see it at night.
Yeah.
And people would be looking and looking. So I would turn on the light on my phone and just shine it for people. Remember, I would tilt it.
You know where it was.
I know exactly what it is. So I would it's right there. And so people would be like, oh, cool. And they would take pictures. But if you didn't know, it just blends in because it's just engraved in.
And it's pretty dark.
It's very dark. And so we had something happen while we were there. Right. So DC is like any big city where you can rent the scooters or the bikes to get
with
around.
The app and they self-charge.
And we had walked down from the Lincoln Memorial over to the water by the mall, and we were standing there, and it was a great night. It was just really nice and calm, and a couple of guys had rode by us on their bikes. But like I said, it's very dark, and if you're by that area, there's different levels. There's a bunch of stairs and steps and different levels, and you don't notice them. And one of these guys just took a header into probably a piece of marble that was probably waist high. Yeah. He did not see it, and you just heard that bite because it's like plastic.
It was so loud. I actually thought, and I think a lot of people around thought, like some sort of explosive had gone off.
It crunched that bike. You could hear the plastic like crunching. Yeah. And his friends were like, "Whoa, dude, are you okay?" And he's like, "Oh man!" And
it was like 8 or 9 o'clock at night.
We almost were like going to rush over and see if he was okay. He got up and he walked around, so he seemed okay. But it's kind of dangerous. You have to really be aware.
You definitely have to be careful. But it really was. It's probably one of my favorite videos to make.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Just because everything was so accessible.
Yes.
And it's DC, right? So you're just kind of in that DC cloud of like, oh my gosh, look at all this history and these monuments and all these things. And we have other videos, and we'll do another podcast talking about the Washington Mall.
Yes.
But this one was just, everybody's learned about the Lincoln assassination. And here you and I are walking down the streets next to the buildings of where it actually happened.
Yeah, it is like you said, we're walking in time, we're walking in history. And you can compare photos of then and today, which is so neat, like finding the locations, is you can compare this look like this and this look like that. And the basic layout of DC has not changed at all. Yep. So you can find all of those locations, which is really great. And even when you look at pictures like when Lincoln was assassinated, the Washington Monument was being made. It had stalled for about 20 years during the war. Yeah. So it's like halfway built. But Lincoln saw the Washington Memorial being made. He knew that was going to be there. I'm sure he had no idea the Lincoln Memorial would be there, but he knew the Washington Memorial was going to be there. So you can imagine these people, you're in the places where these people were, which is really cool.
Again, this is probably one of my favorite videos to make, not only just filming, but also editing. I got to do some fun stuff. We talked about maps, kind of a little foreshadowing to something that we hope to do in the future. Maybe with a Patreon page about our Walk with History maps. We'll see. But Abraham Lincoln had an impact on history that it cannot be understated. Right? He was a star that burned just a bit brighter in a sky full of historical brilliance. And while there will always be bad actors throughout history, like John Wilkes Booth, that try to extinguish the flame of those who burned so bright, these giants of history, they generate so much interest that we will not soon forget that light that they shine. For it echoes throughout history, and we walk in their footsteps every day. So thank you for listening to the Talk with History podcast, and please reach out to us at our website, talkwithhistory.com. That's talkwithhistory.com. But more importantly, if you know someone else that might enjoy this podcast, please share this with them, especially if you think that today's topic would interest a friend. Shoot them a text and tell them to look up the Talk with History podcast, or better yet, just text them a direct link to today's episode. We rely on you, our community, to grow, and we appreciate you all every day. We'll talk to you next time.
Thank you.